Republic of Congo's new president, Felix Tshisekedi, as the second vice chair. And Tshisekedi's inclusion is seen as his acceptance after the AU had rejected his election.
Selassie played in the formation of the Organization of African Unity, and that also set the pace for the African heads of state when they began their meeting, and we saw them speaking unity in terms of implementation of the Continental Free Trade Area. Today, South Africa presented its instruments after ratifying, and that moves the continent closer to the full implementation of the Continental Free Trade Area. The heads of state also discussed peace and security issues, and amongst the hotspots that were discussed was the issue of South Sudan, which is implementing a peace agreement, but the head of state noted that the implementation is a bit slow and more needs to be done. Also on the issue of Central African Republic, so the heads of state congratulating the warring factions of Central African Republic for accepting to put their differences aside and compromising towards a peaceful situation in the country. The heads of state also discussed issues of Somalia was also an issue, and the conflict in Libya, as well issues about tension in other areas. And also something that came up interesting was what that we noted was the fact that the heads of state realized that there are now new threats to peace and security. For example, Mozambique, which had recently had a terrorist attack, is an issue that the heads of state discussed. And also apart from peace and security issues, we had the African heads of state receiving a report on the progress of the implementation of the African Union reforms. And this was presented by the president of Rwanda, Mr. Paul Kagame. Apart from that, the heads of state also talked about the issue of putting forth the issue of discussing better policies for refugees and the displaced people. And the UN Secretary General, Mr. Guterres, highlighted the fact that the globe needs to learn from Africa, which has now an open door policies as far as refugees and migrants is concerned.
And of course, today, Rwandan President Paul Kagame officially handed over the reins, as it were, of the African Union chairmanship to his Egyptian counterpart, Abdel Fattah el-Sisi. There may indeed be a refocusing of the AU agenda, but are we likely to see any fundamental changes as far as this leadership is concerned?
Well, what we might see, Lindy, is just a projection of issues that have been on the agenda of the African Union. And with this, during his opening speech, President Sisi said that he will focus more on fighting armed groups in the continent. We know that Egypt has been a victim several times of armed conflict or armed groups, so he says that will be part of his focus. Also on peace and security, the president of Egypt is talking about more of having mediation and preventive diplomacy as opposed to reactive diplomacy. So we might see Egypt pushing for more prevention of conflicts as opposed to post-conflict resolution, which also he says he will tackle. Also, another issue he has promised is to ensure that the Continental Free Trade Area that has been started before this year, before he took over, is really implemented. And also, he's also keen to ensure that institutional reforms and financial reforms of the African Union take center stage.
Colette Wanjoy, thank you so much for keeping us up to speed, joining us there live from Addis Ababa. Well, the African Union's framework on transformation, known as Agenda 2063, looks to significantly institute wide-ranging economic and social policies. Well, the AU Commissioner for Economic Affairs, Professor Victor Harrison, has stressed the economic policies that are needed to stimulate the development of the continent.
Let us promote a green economy. Social development is important. We have to strengthen education and improve the quality of education as well as protection. Lastly, we also have to develop institutions. We need to stimulate inter-African. We have to stimulate Africa's partnership with the rest of the world, and also we have to strengthen regional integration.
Well, of course, discussions on refugee rights and the challenges of statelessness of refugee children have featured prominently in discussions at the African Union Summit in Addis Ababa. The UN Refugee Agency in Uganda is, in fact, calling on the AU to address the root causes of conflict in the region to enable millions of refugees to return home. Isabel Nakiria spent the day at an English learning center for refugees in Kampala to find out more about the challenges they face.
Shattered dreams for dozens of refugee children in Kampala. Patrick Mangalano is one of the students signed up to take English language lessons here. His ultimate dream is to one day return to the Congo and become a politician. But for now, he just dreams of being able to attend a school where classes are always in session.
We stay at home without learning English because we don't have the desk, we don't have chalks. Everything is over. I feel so bad. What about others? What about my friends who will come after me?
It's meant to be a normal school day at this center, but no children have reported because the furniture has worn out. That means over 50 refugee children are missing out on their English lessons, and this could affect their grades. The learning center is supported by a local church, but the church alone can't donate enough money to keep the school running all year long. Many of the child refugees here are Congolese who don't speak English. Their parents wish they could give them a better education, but can't afford to take them to schools in the city.
My children are my future. I wish they go back to school because they will help me when I grow old and when I'm not able to work.
When we don't teach, the parents are not feeling good, and they are coming day to day, day by day, all the time to come and ask when we will start the program so that they can send the children.
The UN Refugee Agency in Uganda is trying to help.
Go to the school, you will see people sitting at the window. You don't learn anything there, you know. So if we want to be serious about education, we have to increase substantially our efforts.
So to increase those efforts, the UN has earmarked $11 million to build new schools and boost the education of the 100,000 child refugees in Uganda. But that money will only help children living in refugee settlements, and not those like Patrick who are in the city. So for now, that idea of attending class every day on schedule remains just a dream. Isabel Nakiria, CGTN, Kampala.
And turning to some other news now, let's head to Algeria, where the ruling FLN party has picked incumbent President Abdelaziz Bouteflika as its flag bearer for the upcoming April 18 elections. 81-year-old Bouteflika has been in office since 1999. However, he's rarely seen in public after suffering a stroke, which confined him to a wheelchair. His state of health has generated debate as to whether he would even vie for a fifth term. While announcing his candidature, the party leadership said the choice was based on the stability and economic success that Algeria has enjoyed under President Bouteflika.
It is my announcement that the National Liberation Front Party, FLN, has nominated President Abdelaziz Bouteflika as its candidate for the April presidential elections.
Because of his valuable achievements, the gains he has made to the country, I think it is natural that Bouteflika will run for a fifth term. We as the National Liberation Front support his candidacy for the presidency.
Let's take a short break. Here's what's still ahead on the program. Security concerns in Africa as ISIL looks for new bases. The Food and Agriculture Organization warns that a deadly virus could wipe out fish stocks in Lake Victoria.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself. If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Right. right, let's start with security matters now. US President Donald Trump says the international coalition against ISIL should liberate all ISIL-held territories this week in Syria and Iraq. Now, while this has been perceived as a great success, it has also raised concerns for the African continent. ISIL's defeat in Iraq and Syria has forced its militants to look for new bases. Experts say they're likely to look towards North Africa. Here's Adel El-Mahrawi with more.
ISIL is maybe on the verge of completely losing its territories in Iraq and Syria, but the group remains alive. For months, its leaders have been fleeing the battle in the Levant looking for a new home. So Trump's announcement this week doesn't mean it's the end for ISIL.
President Donald Trump's announcement is just a political propaganda because the US troops are probably leaving Syria this April. ISIL still exists. As long as there are regional conflicts, it will survive and it will keep its strength. They have cells in tens of Arab and European capitals. Their mission now is to keep them strong.
Experts say all indications point out that Africa is their next destination. Libya's instability has been a fertile land for ISIL and other extremist groups. In the south of the troubled country, ISIL has been creating new training camps where some of its leaders have been hiding.
Libya is the true safe haven for ISIL. Many extremist groups are growing there. The nature of the conflict there is quite complex, and if ISIL is going to set up another state, it's most probably in Libya. It has great support from Boko Haram in Nigeria and Somalia's Al-Shabaab. However, I don't think ISIL is feeling the crisis everyone is talking about. It's not in a rush to announce a state. It will take its time, and when it's ready, it will re-emerge stronger than before.
This week, African leaders will be discussing how to combat terrorism during the AU summit.
If African leaders succeed to agree on a unified definition for terrorist organizations and groups, that would be a step forward and could be a great approach to counter terrorism. Africans must also agree on a comprehensive and strategic plan to fight these groups.
ISIL's head in Iraq and Syria is maybe cut off, but two more will grow in another place. The group that has seen some 79 states fight it still has supporters in Egypt's Sinai, Tunisia, Libya, and the stretch of land in sub-Saharan Africa that connects Nigeria to Somalia. If African countries do not move rapidly, experts believe that what happened in Syria and Iraq could be replicated in this continent. Adel El-Mahrawi, CGTN, Cairo.
Scientists in Uganda are investigating claims that the freshwater disease known as tilapia lake virus has been detected in parts of Lake Victoria. The UN Food and Agriculture Organization warns the deadly virus could wipe out fish stocks in a short time if not contained. The virus, which attacks the tilapia fish species, is common in Asia. CGTN's Michael Baleke tells us more.
Anxious for a big catch, but a highly contagious fish disease, the tilapia lake virus is believed to be spreading in these waters. And the UN Food and Agriculture Organization warns, while the lake virus poses no direct health risks to humans, it causes high mortalities in the Nile tilapia species.
It kills tilapia on farmed tilapia, and it registers high mortality. So the threat is that if this comes on board as another fish disease, the industry of fish farming risks collapsing.
Uganda is a huge consumer of tilapia fish and a traditional dish in most countries of sub-Saharan Africa. The UN body working with local authorities has now set up a committee to investigate the reported outbreak, which could have a marked impact on global food security.
The virus has not yet affected our waters, but it is in the region. Other countries have it. We are guarding against it, and we are meeting as ministers in charge, Lake Victoria, the three ministers. We are meeting soon to look at all the safeguards.
According to the UN Agency for Food and Agriculture, the tilapia lake virus was first discovered in 2014 in Asia. Scientists say the tilapia lake virus disease kills 80 to 100% of the fish it infects, meaning that any outbreak on these waters of Lake Victoria, shared by Uganda, Kenya and Tanzania, could have a serious impact on fish populations and fishing activity. Uganda's total annual fish production is about 550,000 tons, with 90% of that coming from the country's 5 largest freshwater lakes, according to the UN Food and Agriculture Organization. Michael Baleke, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
In Kenya's semi-arid north, hundreds of pastoralists are armed, both to defend against and engage in the age-old tradition of cattle raiding. As jobs become scarce and cattle succumb to the drought, a section of pastoralists are taking up firearms to protect their communities and their herds.
He keeps one eye on the cattle he is herding and another on the firearm he is holding. Herding cattle in Kenya's north is a difficult task, one filled with risks. Safu is a member of the Borana community. They keep cattle and sell them for profit.
We keep goats, cows, donkeys and camels. We bring them to the watering hole every 2 days.
Families choose family members to herd their cattle. These herders walk hundreds of kilometers and often spend months away from home in search of water and pasture. Occasionally, women from the community are sent to bring the herders food. They all have to watch out for the bandits. Marsabit shares an expansive, porous international border with Ethiopia, which has no tight grip on its southern part. The tough terrain and vast area makes this place difficult to police. Some pastoralists take the law into their own hands, sourcing illegal arms from the neighboring districts, some of which also share international borders with other countries in conflict. The easy availability of small arms in Marsabit is a motivating factor for conflict, fueling cattle raids between the communities. But Safi's firearm was provided by members of his community.
There's a committee that sits and decides who should get the firearm. So now we've been given this to protect the people and the animals. If anything happens, we are called to help. And we protect everyone, regardless of their tribe. That's why we are entrusted with the guns.
The government's peace-building efforts have yielded short-term solutions in some parts. But the culture of raiding among the Samburu, Turkana, Pokot, Borana, Gabra and Rendile communities continues amidst scarce resources. In many parts there are still sporadic raids where animals are taken. It robs the communities of their livelihoods. With little guarantee of their safety, the armed herdsmen of Loyangalani trudge on, keeping their herds close and their firearms closer. Wilkisa Nyabwa, CGTN in Loyangalani, Kenya.
And let's go to Zimbabwe now, where passengers have started to gather at an informal station in Kadre Park each day to take the only commuter train. It's been dubbed the Freedom Train. The 20-kilometer ride ends in the country's second-largest city of Bulawayo. The government revived the route in an effort to provide a crucial lifeline for struggling commuters.
Zimbabwe's only commuter train is cheap and reliable. Each morning, travelers walk to catch the train that leaves the Kadre Park settlement on its 20-kilometer journey into Bulawayo. This service was suspended for 13 years under former President Robert Mugabe's rule and was only revived in November.
So let's just say the NRZ came like a savior to the people of Bulawayo, because now you can work for something more reasonable. You don't have to work for transport only.
The government last month announced that fuel prices would more than double. This triggered violent protests and further pressure on minibuses to hike prices. Bulawayo once had 2 commuter train lines, while the capital, Harare, had 3. All of them were dubbed freedom trains as they allowed passengers to avoid higher road costs. The services were then scrapped around 2006. The Cowdray Park line is the only one to be relaunched in a $2.5 million project funded by state-owned National Railways of Zimbabwe.
It's $1.50 is very expensive for us. So on a train it's better because it's 50 cents. 50 cents is less. So you can have change and you can have some bread, or you can buy bread and vegetable for your children at home sometimes. But things are very, very tough now for us. It's not easy for us to live.
Though the train provides much-needed relief for commuters, some worry that the service will not last. They are urging the government to think about a long-term strategy.
With the moment, with the challenges we have, maybe if they were going to reduce the price of fuel so that this combi can also adjust on the price of fuel.
Zimbabwe's rail network was built under British colonial rule. The main line between Harare and Bulawayo, opened in 1907, was once electrified, but vandalism stripped it of its copper cables, signaling system and truck motors. Wilkisanyabo, CGTN.
And here's what's coming up in your sports news up next. South African Sunit Viljoen eyeing the Javelin World title when the World Championships kick off in Doha.
Africa Live. Find your voice.